Okay, we're going to work on the graphing part of the review now. So um, before I graph, I'm going to go through and talk about A, B, the y-intercept, and all of those things. So on the first graph, we've got A is 1 and B is 3. And we talked about that A and the y-intercept are the same thing. So that means my y-intercept is going to be 1. So what I'm going to go ahead and do real quick is graph that point on my graph and put 0, 1 into my t-chart. R is not needed here because that's only used when I'm graphing E. So I'll look at R when I get to 24 and 27. So going from there, my left-right number is -2. Remember, you look in the exponent because H is always contained, and I take the opposite. And then my up-down number is 0, which will also be the wall. And I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. And then when deciding if it's growth or decay, since B is bigger than 1, it's growth, which is a backwards L. And growth tells me that my other points I should choose for x are going to be +1 and +2. When I make the t-chart, I'm going to leave out h and k, so I'm only going to graph 3 to the x power. So when I put 1 in, I get 3, and when I put 2 in, I get 9. So graphing those points, I've got 1, 3, and 2, 9. And then before I connect, I just remember I need to shift everything over twice. And then I've got my shape. So growth, it's going to coast along the wall and then shoot up really fast. And there's 22. All right, on 23, A is 2 and B is a fourth. So again, I already know my y-intercept, which is 2, so I'm going to graph it. I'm going to put it in my t-chart as 0, 2. My left-right number is -2, so I'm looking at the exponent, and my up-down number is -5, which is also the wall, so I'm going to go ahead and draw that one in. And then when I decide my shape here, because B is less than 1, because it's a fourth, this is going to be decay. So in the end, I'll have a regular L. Again, R is not needed for this problem. So when I make this t-chart, because it's decay, I'm going to use -1 and -2. And below, I'm going to show you how I get those points a little bit more specifically. So when I make my t-chart, I'm just going to use 2 times 1/4 to the x. So if you look below, if I take 2 times 1/4 to the -1, the -1 is going to flip 1/4 into 4. So what I'll really end up having is 2 times 4 to the first, which is just 8. So -1 gives me 8. And if I put -2 in, the -2 is also just going to flip it. So it's 2 times 4 to the second power, which gives me 32, which won't fit on my graph. But I'm going to go ahead and graph the -1/8 though. And then before I connect my points, I'm going to shift everything over to the left 2 and down 5. And then again, because I know the shape, I know it's going to go down really fast and then coast along the wall. So it makes a regular L. All right, 24. 24, the only thing that's going to be different about that is to tell, how do you tell if it's growth or decay? And that's where R is going to come in. But A is still 3, B is E, or 2.7, whichever you want to use. Um, and then R. R is multiplied to your exponent. So when I look there, I see a 2 is being multiplied, and that's going to make this growth. Because E to the second power, if I look at that as my total B value, that's bigger than 1, which means it's going to be growth. So my shape's going to be a backwards L. So if R is positive, I'm going to have growth. And if R ends up being negative, which is what's going to happen on 27, it's going to be decay. So we'll take a look at that one later. My y-intercept is 3, same as A, so I'm going to graph it. I'm going to put it in my t-chart as 0, 3. My left-right number, there is nothing added in the exponent, so it's 0, and my up-down number is -3, which is also the wall. So I'm going to draw that. And now I'm ready to make my t-chart. Since it's growth, I'm going to use 1 and 2. And when I make my t-chart for this one, I'm going to leave out h and k. So my t-chart is going to consist of 3 times e to the 2x. And I just used the E button when I did this. So again, kind of walking through those steps. If I make x1, then what I'm going to do is take 3 times e to the 2 times 1, which is just 3 times e squared. And if I type that into my calculator, I end up getting about 22. So up here, I'm just going to write 22 though. Well, I'll write 22.2, but I won't be able to fit that on my chart. And if I did, if I could, I would just graph it as 22. Now with 2, it's going to be 3 times e and then 2 times x, so 2 times 2. So what I can type in my calculator is 3 times e to the 4th power. And when I do that, I get 163.8. So I'm going to put that in my t-chart, which also will never graph. So as far as my graph goes, I only get 1 point. So when I graph this one, I'm going to end up having, because I know the shape, it's a backwards L, I'm going to quickly shift my point down 3 times. And then because I know the shape, it's going to coast along the well and then shoot up really fast. Okay? All right, let's go to 25. So on 25, what's different here is that b is 4 because b always has to be a positive number. So when it looks like a negative number, that means there's a negative 1 in place of your a, which makes my y-intercept negative 1. So I'm going to graph it, put it in my t-chart. R is not playing a role here. That's only if I graph with e. My left-right number is negative 3, and my up-down number is negative 1, which is my wall. All right, but when I go for the shape, because b is 4 and it's bigger than 1, my initial thought is it's growth, which it is, and growth is a backwards L. But what's going to happen, because a is negative 1, and if you look here, my initial shape, because a is negative 1, is going to flip it horizontally. So it's actually going to be this red line, this red curve. So I'm going to leave that there, erase the blue one, and just remember that that's supposed to be my shape. Since it's growth, I'm going to pick 1 and 2. And then for my t-chart, I'm going to leave out h and k, and I'm going to use negative 1 times 4 to the x power. So doing that, negative 1 times 4 to the first power is negative 4. So with 1, I get negative 4. And when I put 2 in, I end up getting negative 16, which is never going to fit, but I'll go ahead and list it. And I'm going to graph this point now. So 1, negative 4. And now my points are going to shift. Everything's going to shift left 3 and down 1. And I did not draw on my wall. Let me quickly do that. And so now that I know the shape, the one in red at the very bottom, it's going to curve and then go straight down like that. All right, let's go to 26. So on 26, I've got A is 1, B is a half. Since B is less than 1, it's decay. I got a regular L shape. No R in this one. My y-intercept is 1, so I can graph it, put it in my t-chart. My left-right number is 1, and my up-down number is negative 5, which is also the wall, so draw that in there. And since it's decay, I'm going to use negative 1 and negative 2, and I'm going to show you how you get the y-coordinate for it. So again, when I make my t-chart, I'm going to leave out h and k. I'm just going to use 1/2 to the x. So when I put 1/2 to the negative 1 power, again, the negative 1 is just going to switch it to 2. 2 to the first, and so if I put negative 1, I get 2. And if I put negative 2 in, the negative again switches it, and I now have 2 squared, and I get 4 out of it. So those are the 2 points I'm going to graph as well. So negative 1, 2, and negative 2, 4. And now I'm going to shift everything, right 1 and down 5. And then I know my shape. It's a regular L, so it's going to go straight down and then coast along the wall. All right, last problem. So this one is going to involve the R. So going through, I've got A as a half, B is either 2.7 or E, whichever you want to use, but R is what's multiplied to my X, and that looks like a negative X, but it's really negative 1 times X. So since that's negative 1, that's going to make this decay. So it's going to be a regular L shape. My y-intercept is a half, which I'm going to try to estimate. My left-right number is 0. There's nothing added in the exponent, and my up-down number is 1, so that's my wall. And now I'm going to make my t-chart, and since it's decay, I can go ahead and use -1 and -2, and I'm going to show you how I get those points next. All right, so putting my points in, I'm going to use 1/2 and e to the -1 x. So just kind of walking through what I'm going to do. When I put -1 in, I'm going to get 1/2 times e, and negative of -1 becomes, I'm going to have to write it below, 1/2 times e to the first. And when I do that, as far as the math goes, I get about 1.4. So when I graph it, it'll be more like 1.5. And then I'm going to put -2 in. And when I put -2 in, it's going to be 1/2 times e to the negative of -2, which is going to make it 1/2 times e to the second power. And when I do that, I get about 3.7. And when I graph that, again, it'll be more like 3.5, maybe 4. So I'm going to put those points on there. -1, more like 1.5, and -2, I'm going to make it closer to 4. And now I'm going to take all the points and I'm going to shift them. All right, so all the points are just going to shift up 1. So up 1, and up 1. And because I know the shape, it can go straight down, coast along my wall. And that's it. There's your graphing.